All right, well, panel one was kind of big picture. What's the vibe? What's changing? This panel is going to be about really what to do in response to what's changing. So our goal here is that it's going to be a very practical and action-oriented panel. You're going to focus on the real decisions that you as business owners are making every day. We hope that you leave this session with clear steps that you could take immediately. Good to have the ideas, but also like specific actions that you can take to make the next tax season smoother and more predictable. We have some fresh faces. So we have some esteemed guests I'm very excited to have a conversation with. First, we have Gabriela Sapp, a capital advisor from SF Small Business Development Center, David Kupferman, CPA, and Doug Bend from Bend Law, who work hands-on with San Francisco small business owners every day, from tax and compliance to legal structure and funding readiness. If I can ask you all to give a little bit more of an introduction on who you are, what you do, just so we have that context, and then we're going to launch into the questions.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Gabriela Sapp, and I am a business advisor for San Francisco Small Business Development Center. We have our table over there. This is a program sponsored by the U.S. Small Business Administration and the City of San Francisco that offers free business advice to entrepreneurs in the city. This center is also nationwide, this organization. What I do with the clients that are referred to me through the SBDC is to help them with capital, mainly access to capital, but because I am an accounting and finance professional, I can help them also with bookkeeping questions, with financial management, business planning, projections, budgeting, etc. So please check the table over there. We have the director, Jessica, who can connect you with the services so you can access that for free.
I'm David Kupferman, CPA, and I've been practicing here in San Francisco longer than I want to remember, a long time. Originally, I was trained as a linguist when I went to work for KPMG, the big global CPA firm, and then I started my own practice. And in our practice, we have helped many tech ventures from the first website ever sold. They were our client. I also co-advised Intuit's CPA Advisory Council and was quite involved with some of the design features of QuickBooks Online. So in my practice, we're right up the street here in North Beach. We work on complex tax matters for individuals and business, tax controversy and tax forensics, the wild and crazy stuff, which helps me address questions for normal folks.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. Doug Bend with Bend Law Group. Started the firm back in 2010. We focus on helping out entrepreneurs. We like thinking about it in terms of seasons. So a spring season, idea inception. You have a new idea, forming legal entities, laying the groundwork for companies. Summer, raising capital, growing your business. Fall, scaling. And then finally winter, having an exit. We help launch over 50 companies a year and serve as outside general counsel. Thank you.
Well, maybe to get us warmed up here, so a question for all of our panelists. In your work with small businesses, what's the number one tax-related issue you see that causes the most confusion or distress for business owners?
I think for us, it's entity selection, and a lot is really driven by entity selection, including taxes. And so for a lot of entrepreneurs, I think when you start a business, they think of entity in terms of liability protection, and that's certainly a key part of it. But what entity you select really drives how you will be taxed, from your business activities. And so making sure that you choose an entity that best suits you, so you can net the most possible from your business.
All of our ongoing clients are doing really well. But for the new clients coming in the door, many times the painful thing is, oh my God, they've got messed up books, or they don't have them, we have to catch up, or they weren't set up, and then it's just a cascading series of years of errors, and then it becomes forensic and expensive. So that's why it's really important to work with a good bookkeeping partner to get started and do it right.
Yes, I can add that recently I was working with a person who wants to start a limo business, and he didn't know that he had to file LLC taxes, estate taxes. So he was working with a wrong person, and he owes taxes for 7 or 8 years. So for that reason, we couldn't help yet to access capital. So it's very important, as they said, to talk to, work with the right professional, and please talk to us so we can refer you to good CPAs, good lawyers, and I can help you with financial management questions as well.
Okay, from a CPA's perspective, where do most small business owners, or where do they most often leave money on the table from a tax perspective?
Well, I would say when they really have messed up books, you start missing deductions. When you're not talking with a professional, if you're talking with, AI is great, but if you're trying to get guidance from AI, you might go a little sideways on there. But it's where, certain deductions, you haven't consulted with professionals, where you do have messed up books. Another thing that I commonly see is where you practice what I call unsafe sex accounting, where everything is commingled, personal finances and business finances, and then you end up getting what I call accounting STDs, which are really hard to cure, and therefore you end up losing deductions and ending up with a very expensive mess for folks like us to clear up, or for Pilot to clear up.
We don't want those. I don't want those.
They're endemic. They're out there.
Yeah. Okay. From the SBDC side, where do you see founders missing opportunities simply because they don't know what's available?
Well, first, most people, unfortunately, don't know that we offer free services and we can help you access capital to start or grow your business. But missing opportunities are when businesses start with all their passion and their experience in the industry, but they don't understand accounting, they don't understand taxes, and it's very important. For many people, maybe boring stuff, but it's very, very important. Because that can actually ruin the business, as I was explaining before with the limo. Another missing opportunity is like if they are presented with a good opportunity for a good contract, and I had a case like that, and they are requested, show me your financials, show me your business plan, and they don't have any of that, well, they miss that opportunity. They miss opportunities to grow. They miss opportunities to access capital, and it takes their peace of mind, basically, rather than being focused on what they know how to do. So please contact the right professionals.
And just a plus one that I'm thinking back to I was working with a business that they were applying for a grant. They hadn't had any bookkeeping for 2.5 years. And they had like now an urgent need because the grant application and like a lot of financing, it requires a bunch of documentation as part of applying. And they didn't have it. They didn't really know the true performance of the organization, and it was like a mad scramble to try to get the books in place, to then get the reporting in place on top of that for the grant deadline, and it caused so much stress for that business. I really felt bad for them, but it's also, it could have been prevented by having had some systems in place a little bit earlier. So I really feel for them, but I don't want anybody to be panicking about a financing opportunity or need. But what do you wish more clients had in place before coming to you?
Well, of course, solid, clean books. But even when they say they've got them, I've got to look at them and assess them. And sometimes when you have, I don't know who's out there in the crowd, but when you have a venture, like let's say it's a tech venture, many times the part of the whole pizza pie of people, you have the ops person, the tech genius, the marketing guy. The parts that missing quite often is the financial brain part, and that then in turn can result in an impaired ability to be raising capital, to have somebody sitting there at the table. I have stepped in certain cases to do that. I have taken equity in certain cases. I always lose on that, so I usually instead just bill hourly. Thank you very much. I don't want your equity. But many times what is missing is when you're talking about in that sort of sector, a trajectory, is the financial brain. And that's where sometimes a company like Pilot can come in, where they not only have, I don't want to sound like a commercial, but where they not only have bookkeeping, but they have access to, or I think maybe even on staff, some people akin to a CFO-like level of advisory services if your own CPA doesn't do that. In my case, I have CFO'd and been controller and raised venture capital for companies around the world, actually. But most CPAs who are in tax practice or in audit, we generally speaking don't have that background. So yeah,
What should small business leaders, or when should small business leaders reconsider their entity structure, and what legal or tax signals suggest that it's time to revisit that decision?
Well, I think especially early on, at least annually, considering your entity structure. So I think for a service-based business, when you're starting out, you're building out your book of business, your client base, starting out as a sole proprietor, for tax reasons may be okay. But as soon as you have $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 in net revenue, I think that's a good time to have a conversation with your CPA as to, does this still make sense for me to be a sole proprietorship from a tax perspective? Or should I instead be an S corporation?
You mean per month or per year?
Per year.
Oh, per year.
Sorry, per year. I think you may have, he's a tax guy, listen to the tax guy, but at a minimum, if you're netting $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year from your business, not gross, but net, I think at that point, if not before, talking to your CPA, what is my tax liability this year as a sole proprietorship? And what would it have been if I'd been an S corporation? And that's usually kind of a tipping point for a lot of small business owners that it makes sense to be an S corporation to harvest those tax gains for being an S corp versus sole prop. And I think I'm a good example of that. When I started Ben Law Group in 2010, I was a sole proprietorship for the first year and a half. And then in 2012, seeing the revenue go up from the business, at that point, converting over an S corp to harvest those tax savings.
Well, Doug, I think this is our first argument of the morning.
Oh.
I would beg to disagree that, my friend, that having merely 60 grand net out of a sole proprietorship, and generally when you start a business, should you immediately start an entity? I will push the brake down and say no, hell no, no. Once you've started, you're really not going to know what kind of entity structure, what kind of investors, are they foreign, are they domestic? You're not going to know yet. So it's better to focus on the business, grow it, have clean books, obey all the laws and all this stuff, and do your stupid, local city filings and all that baloney, and grow your business. And once the bucks start coming in, then it comes time to pay for a solid lawyer and for a CPA. But having an entity like a corporation, make no mistake, it is like having another baby. You have to give birth to it. That's expensive and painfully expensive sometimes. And then you have to feed it, burp it, and change its diapers. And that's a whole responsibility, which when you are starting your business, I encourage you not to do it. So only do it once it makes sense. And then some people think, oh, hey, I'm going to create a company. That's going to be magical. I won't have to report any taxes. No, they're not magical ways of making taxes go away. Okay? So it's more nuanced discussion, I would generally say. Doug?
Well, okay. So I opened that door. So, for me, it's every business is different. And there's a few different reasons why you may want to create a legal entity, one of which is tax. There's liability protection, there's marketing, there's a number of other reasons you may want to create entity. And I think, it's understanding the cost-benefit analysis is how we view it. So it's not a one-size-fits-all answer. It's understanding for your business, what is it going to cost to have an entity in place? What does it cost for CPA, annual franchise taxes, running payroll, legal, hopefully hire me. But all these expenses, what is that going to be a year? It's going to be $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 a year on the cost side of the equation. And then the other side of the equation, what is the benefit for you and for your business? And where does that scale tilt, where it makes sense for you as a business owner to pull that trigger? And a lot of the conversations we have with our potential clients is that if it doesn't make sense for you now, set a calendar alert for November 1st, December 1st to do an annual check-in to see if maybe at that point in time there is enough benefit on the benefit side of the scale to form the entity effective January 1st. So of the 50 plus entities we launch every year, we launch 20 plus on January 1st. And the reason for that is a lot of the costs of having an entity are calendar year costs. And so the CPA is not likely to prorate the cost of filing a tax return. California doesn't prorate that minimum $800 a year franchise tax. A lot of it's calendar year expenses. So very much a cost-benefit analysis. And if there's not enough tax benefit there to form an entity, maybe there's some of these other factors where there is enough benefit where it makes sense.
Of course, I agree with this gentleman. With SGDC, when I work with a client for the first time, the first thing I ask is, what are your business goals? And based on that, and based on who's starting the business, if they tell me I want to have partners, and they always tell me, oh, I want to file an LLC. And I'm not kidding, but every week I basically help people to create corporations and dissolve corporations, because for many people, as they say, it doesn't make sense. Just because Facebook or YouTube or whoever says form an LLC, And I was thinking, because I teach these things at the university as well. So I was thinking why everyone talks about LLCs in the Bay Area is because of tech companies. I don't know if you knew that LLCs allow a limited number of members, which S corporations don't. They are called shareholders, and the max number of shareholders are 100. So for tech companies, it makes sense, a lot of sense in the world, to have an LLC because they're not going to have just 100 people investing in the company, and they need large amounts of capital. So I tell people, hey, what is your type of business, first of all? You might not need an LLC. You might need maybe an S corporation. But I agree with them. If you are starting and testing the market, it's going to be more expensive, more compliance to do. And then if you don't work with the right CPA or lawyer or us, then they don't know what forms they have to file. And like this limo service, they owe taxes for so many years, right? In my work, what I see is when the business is growing, we help them to incorporate, and we usually say, don't incorporate in the middle of the year because it's going to be 2 sets of taxes. So just plan this, So let's talk in the beginning of the year and let's plan how your business is going. And if the business is growing and you think, I use this estimation for $100,000 in revenue, you might be able to have profits. And if you have profits that are considerable, then you will have money to pay for all these taxes, for state taxes, federal taxes, and then you can have the money to do it. Before that, you're just getting more a complexity that you don't need to.
To add to that, what you were saying, if you have good money, then you'll have money to pay taxes. But after paying taxes and after paying ridiculously high rents here in San Francisco and very high labor rates, etc., then you might not have any money to pay for the lawyers and the CPAs. So hopefully you are at the stage earning enough where it does make sense. Now, in certain cases, as Doug was saying, because you're in something that's potentially risky or you're trying to protect some IP in a certain way, that yes, that's the time to do it. But other times, so just one step at a time, I would say, yeah.
From the bookkeeping side, and I'm thinking about a woman who I was talking with, I think 2 weeks ago, and she exemplifies the most common situation that I see. She's a restaurant owner in Embarcadero. She has been working on this business for 5 years. The business is marginally profitable, but without her taking a salary. Like the most common situation that I see is like the business is on paper at the end of the day profitable, but it's because of some kind of subsidization of the business from the owner's personal expenses or lack of paying yourself. And so, and it goes back to what you said about, it's like, what is your goal? When she and I were talking, it's like, okay, my goal for 2026 is to be able to pay myself a salary. Step number 1 was she didn't have books. So it was like not clear how much cash she had been infusing into the business over the past 5 years to keep it afloat. What the true profitability of the business was. So it's like step 1 was to get that basic information foundation in place. And then from there, we can figure out what to do to increase profitability. If that's about focusing on increasing revenue, if it's about focusing on increasing your margins, if it's a focus on reducing OpEx. But now it's like now we have the data to have a plan to achieve your goal. And then hopefully the result is you're so profitable that you can achieve your goals and you can grow and you can have the concerns around optimizing your taxes and what entity type and things like that.
In that sort of situation where you're on the cusp and maybe, should you include yourself in salary? Well, invariably what we see is the owner isn't on salary, but they're taking money out. If you have, let's say, an S corporation, you are supposed to be taking salary. That's a whole nother set of fish in that kettle. But forgetting about that, the core thing that we'll see commonly is they're struggling in this situation. They've gotten some money. Let's say they earned a certain sum of money, and then they didn't pay in quarterlies. They weren't an employee. And then suddenly the tax returns are done, and then what the heck? I owe money? Why? Well, because they weren't an employee and they took out income, let's just say, and maybe it was subject to self-employment income taxes, which is another type, and that's a very harsh level of taxation. And so suddenly they own 40 grand. Yeah. So it's really important that you work with a bookkeeper of a higher level who can advise you, if you don't have a CPA, who can advise you, hey, should you take payroll, or maybe you should be paying quarterlies in? Because if you're not paying quarterlies, then you're just going to have a big surprise at the end of the year. And some people say, I hate those guys at the IRS. I don't want to pay them a nickel. Well, I say, well, if you don't, how much is the bank paying you in interest? Nothing. So I say, look, pay the bastards, pay the IRS in the state of California, being blunt, every quarter, or every time you get money, send it to them. Because if you don't, unless you're extremely disciplined, some people are extremely disciplined and they're going to have that saved up. If not, then you're going to end up with a big surprise, and the penalties and interest that the feds and the state are going to ding you with is a lot more than the bank ever would have paid you. So it's sometimes a really hard balance, to balance. It's easy to say from up here, oh yeah, I pay every time, but you have to at least try to. Because if not, then it's a very unpleasant surprise. And when you get past 1 year of owing taxes, once you get into the year number 3, you get into a sand pit out of which it's very difficult to get out of. Now, I have experience dealing with what we call tax debt problem resolution, which is dealing with these terrible debt crises and trying to battle off the IRS and EDD and Board of Equalization and all these different agencies. But you don't want to get there. And so again, working with a good team can help you to minimize that risk.
Okay, I have a last prepared question for us, and then we're going to open it up to questions. So, with the understanding that business owners are in a wide range of situations in this room, if you could have attendees take just one action in the next 30 to 60 days to set themselves up for success from a tax or compliance perspective as a San Francisco business owner in 2026, what would be the one thing you'd ask them to do?
Talk to a CPA. I think, when you're sitting down to do your 2025 taxes, I think not only being reactive, I think a lot of people are very reactive at taxes. I think a lot of CPAs are reactive at taxes. Being proactive with that. And what I mean by that is that when you have the conversations about 2025, asking your CPA, is that what makes sense for me in 2026? And what would my tax liability have been if I'd been an S Corp in 2025 instead of being a sole proprietorship? So I think when you're doing last year's taxes, is a really good check-in point to see if that makes sense moving forward, or if it's time to make a pivot, and for 2026 going forward to save some money on taxes.
Well, from a tax preparer's standpoint, where we always have this oncoming tsunami, I actually see it already out there, the oncoming deluge of tax filings, and invariably the very height of the tsunami is coming right before October 15. Mm-hmm. And so please have pity on all of us CPAs out there, tax preparers. In the next month or two, do your best to stiff things up, get your finances in order, come in and see us earlier and sooner. It's healthier and less nerve-wracking. And also, when things are done and dealt with and handled in a less insane time period, you get better service, you get better help, generally speaking. Mm-hmm. And you get better results, and you save money on taxes, and it works out better. And all is well in the world.
So there is something called, if you put garbage in something, you take the garbage out. It's like if we don't have accurate bookkeeping, right? You P&L, income and expenses correctly done, then imagine what it's going to show your tax returns. So right now, in the next 30 days, I will, right now actually after this meeting, connect with Jessica so we can review your financials and let you know if there are mistakes or not. And then you can be prepared to talk to a CPA or even your tax preparer. To me, forgive me, accounting is more important because you can find a good tax preparer. They're just going to fill out the boxes in the computer. But if your accounting is incorrect, this is what you will see. And I have millions of horror stories about companies with incorrect balance sheets or no balance sheets, and then they get audited with the IRS or the state, and then, it's a problem. Contact SBDC and we can review your financials of last year and let you know if you're ready or you need to fix those before the tax deadline. Thank you.
Oh, one little secret along those lines, what to do now? One idea would be, look at your December credit card charges, assuming you're a small business, okay? So even if it wasn't yet coming out of your bank statement, because you charged it, you paid for it, already, you can go back and with the proper accounting journal entries, you can deduct it in 2025, even though it didn't hit your bank account yet, but you paid for it. Okay? So that's kind of the little tip of the morning here that could save you thousands of dollars.
Okay, excellent. All I'll add is there's so many tax deadlines, compliance deadlines. I think we have like a tax calendar. We can get it to you. Come to the back and we'll get you a tax calendar. The number one thing to not forget is there's like an income tax filing deadline. Depending on your entity type, it's going to be in March or in April for the normal filing. And then many people file on an extension, but you need to actually do the extension filing to then actually complete the return on the extension deadline. So like go stare at the tax calendar and be like, okay, what do I have to worry about in the next month or two? And just have a plan for yourself on if you're going to try to get your taxes filed kind of on the original deadline or on the extension deadline. That's all I ask of you. Mm-hmm. Great. Okay, with that, are there any questions from the audience that our esteemed panelists can answer? And you know it's going to be colorful if he answers.
That's the first question.
Oh, okay, great.
Can we see who's out there, who's starting a business, who has one, what kind of industries? Do you want to lead on that, Doug?
We want like a poll of some kind.
Well, just to know who's out there so we can know
You could
how to
indulge
address.
me and use the seasons analogy, like who's in the spring. So,
Okay, so define the spring season again.
so spring season's idea inception, you're just starting a business.
Okay, raise your hand if you're just starting a business. Nice, welcome. You are on it to be here. Okay, the next season is...
So it's about a third of the people, give or take. Next season's summer, and so you have an entity in place, you're growing the business, you have clients coming in the door.
Are flowers coming up?
Flowers are coming up.
Yes.
Flowers are coming.
Oh, so great. It's about another quarter or so. Then the fall of the business. The business is thriving, it's growing, it's doing well. One.
We're all
And then lastly,
group.
winter. You're looking at having an exit, maybe selling the business, maybe dissolving the business. Anybody come in the winter season?
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Okay, with that.
Hi, I had a question for Gabriella about the LLCs because that's where I find us. What's the downside of doing a single member LLC versus a sole proprietorship? Because the reason I did the LLC was because of protecting myself, like if I sue.
Yeah, I think you did well because the LLC is going to protect your personal assets from any lawsuits, potential risk, right? Not talking about what your business is, but as I said before, you will have to have an additional tax form. You have to hopefully have a good CPA to do your taxes, a good accountant for your bookkeeping. I just believe that an accountant needs to be a bookkeeper. Otherwise, this person is learning and not just filling out the boxes in QuickBooks. I guess the cost is, the downsides of cost, right? The disadvantage of having an LLC, but you have to, like he said, to do the cost-benefit analysis if you want to protect your property. However, I have seen people starting sole proprietors and they buy umbrella insurance, so additional insurance to cover more risk when they are just starting a business. So it doesn't need to necessarily be a corporation. So you have to also know that if you're an LLC single member, you're also treated federal basis for taxes. As a sole proprietor, you have to pay self-employment taxes if you are profitable. So that's why LLCs are recommended if they're growing and they're going to be profitable to select to be taxed as an S corporation, right? So that you eliminate that self-employment taxes.
Yeah, I'd say the biggest drawback is cost, and it's harder in California than most of the country in a lot of ways, but in this particular way, the franchise tax minimum in California is $800. And so even if the business is not active, you have to pay $800 a year if you have an LLC. I'd say the national average is about $200 to $300 a year. So we're multiples higher for the minimum franchise tax compared to other states. I have my uncle gave me he passed away, gave me 5 acres of desert land in Arizona. You can have it if you want, but there's an LLC for it, right? My brother, my cousin, I have an LLC in Arizona. There's no franchise tax. And so it was like, yeah, let's have an LLC, help protect our liability, right? We're in California because that $800 is such a high minimum. I think there's more analysis than maybe in other states as to whether or not LLC makes sense for a business owner. And it's that cost-benefit analysis we discussed earlier. I think the drawback to just relying on insurance, there's two drawbacks. Drawback number one is, what if the policy limit doesn't cover your exposure? So if you're a sole proprietorship, you have a $1 million policy, and you lose the lawsuit for $5 million, even if that policy steps in for the first $1 million, you could be personally on the hook for the remaining $4 million. All right, that's one drawback. Two, what if the policy doesn't cover you at all? So my ideal insurance policy would be one page. I'm going to pay you $10,000 a year, insurance company, and you're going to step in and have my back and cover me up to $1 million if something happens in my business. Of course, that's not how policies are written. Policies are not one page. Policies are 20, 30, 40 pages. They're very convoluted. Section 17 cross-referenced by Section 38. And a few times, we've helped out over 5,000 business owners. A few times a year, several are sued. And we say you have to timely present that claim to your insurance company. Because if you don't, that's a reason for them to deny it. And we see these insurance companies taking weeks comparing the lawsuit to the policy. And it sounds cynical. We see many of them do this. And trying to find a reason not to provide coverage, right? So insurance is a great idea. You should absolutely have insurance. But just relying on insurance, that's the drawback, is the policy limit isn't sufficient or the policy doesn't kick in at all.
My belief on single-member LLCs, I view all of these things as basically one of the many potential moats around your castle. If you have a castle, you want to have more than one ring of protection. You don't want to have the one with water. You want to have another one with some spikes, another one with barking dogs or something. And so merely having a single-member LLC, you might not need that. Maybe if you pick the right customers, that would be good. Maybe if you have, sufficient and good insurance. Maybe if you work with a good lawyer to develop really good contracts, that might suffice. Because then once you create this, an LLC is a small baby. It's a really small one, but it is a baby nonetheless. And you have to still burp it and take care of it and give birth to it and all that. I just encourage people, go slow, keep it simple, and only start creating entities when it's necessary. That's not magically going to save you in taxes. It's going to cost you a bit more in taxes and a bit more administratively. But in terms of the universe of entities, yes, a single member LLC is the simplest one, generally speaking.
Just to add to that, now that we're not arguing anymore like before, I couldn't agree more. I view it as layers of protection, and different businesses have different layers of protection. But generally speaking, the first layer is customer service. And so the amount of legal bills that could be saved on good customer service, it's hard to underestimate that. And so if you have an unhappy customer, comping that meal, comping, some time, whatever it is, erring on the side of good customer service and making them happy, because otherwise they go to a barbecue this weekend, they talk to someone like me, and we say, you should sue, right? So just making the customer happy, and you turn that 1-star Yelp review maybe into a 5-star Yelp review, right? So that's the first layer of protection, is customer service. A second layer of protection for a lot of businesses is contracts. And so having a contract that, one, it creates clear expectations of when this happens, who's responsible, how much is it going to cost, when do you have to pay. So I think a good contract is just as much a marketing document for your clients is legal protection. Clear expectations, allocating risk. Third layer of protection, insurance. We've talked about that before, but it's good to have that. So customer isn't happy with customer service. The contract isn't clear. At least you have that insurance policy to fall back on. And then the fourth and final layer of defense is having that legal entity. And so you lose a lawsuit and there's damages. The insurance company doesn't protect you to some extent. And you have that shield between your personal assets and what happened in the business. And so to David's analogy of the moats, the layers of protection, I think that is spot on.
So let's say somebody goes online, Doug, and they set up a single member LLC, half-baked, on their own, no involvement with a lawyer to have looked at that. How easy is it for the litigator, the opposing side, to pierce that corporate veil to take the rest of your $4 million of assets, Doug? What's your general sense on that?
Well, I think, an LLC is great as long as it's properly set up and properly maintained, right? And so what happens is you have this lawsuit. I think lawyers would like thinking about lawsuits. We enjoy it for some reason. But you have this lawsuit. The plaintiff comes in and says, hey, look, judge, this LLC shouldn't protect this person at all. They didn't have an operating agreement. They didn't have a city business license. They didn't register the DBA. They didn't. And the judge says, well, maybe you're right. Maybe this is kind of a sham and they shouldn't be provided any liability protection. And they let that plaintiff pierce the corporate veil. So lawyers like to call it, because it'll kick out normal, right? Pierce the corporate veil, get the personal assets. Or everything's properly maintained, but it's 3 or 4 or 5 years down the road, properly set up, not properly maintained. you have been paying your franchise taxes. You have been renewing things. And the same hypothetical where that plaintiff is asking the judge saying, we should get at the personal assets. So I think it's important to set up a legal entity, but also make sure it's properly maintained. And I think at least having a conversation with an attorney about how to do that is important because it can vary. The answer to that can be different in Livermore compared to San Francisco.
One thing, you did not ask this question, but I feel compelled to say this, just given the line of discussion here. None of you are going to get sued. I look for you're all going to have absolutely pristine businesses. Here's what I do see more commonly than issues with like actual formal lawsuit. It is business partners who are also spouses, where then there is a falling out either on the business side or on the relationship side that then complicates the other side. And I cannot tell you how many business owners have come that I have personally talked to where it's like, I'm going through a divorce right now and we're trying to separate the assets. Or it's like, well, my expletive husband was like the one who was doing the bookkeeping for the business and he did a shitty job and now the business is really in trouble and that's resulting in a bunch of personal as well as business problems. So this is all to say, if you're in business with a family member or a spouse, make sure that you're on the same page about the formal structure behind the business. Like if it's in one person's name but not the other, is that going to cause problems for you? Like you need to be on the same page about how your mutual, how you're both expressed as owners of the business. Mm-hmm. Okay, because I really do see that, and I see it more frequently than I see formal lawsuits.
Just real quick about that. I mean, everyone talks about the national marriage divorce rate, 50%, what have you. I think the business divorce rate is just as high, if not higher. And it's always rainbows and sunshine when you go into it. Inevitably, there's going to be disagreements between business owners. Someone's going to open the location here versus there. And so I think, having the documents in place of what happens when we disagree. Does someone who's put in more capital or time, do they make that decision? Do you have a third party make that decision? Because inevitably, there's going to be a disagreement. And how is that going to be resolved? And if you don't have a good game plan in place for when that happens, that's when the powder keg builds up and it can break the business.
So I had two failed partnership businesses. They were dissolved, but we didn't have any lawsuits. Why? Because we have a good partnership agreement. And I was in one of the partnerships, I had 4 partners. So it was complicated, but we had a partnership agreement drafted by a lawyer. So it is important when you have partners to do that. That's the first step. Mother, daughter, whatever it is, your best friend. There's going to be some conflicts. We're human beings.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for hosting this event, by the way. So I'm going to share a quick personal anecdote and have a follow-up question about piercing the corporate veil specifically, because I had some personal experience with that. Thankfully, it actually turned out to be a positive thing for me, and I learned a couple of things, and I want to learn more. So basically, I had a non-paying client with a 5-figure invoice. I chased them. They literally told me, oh, we're waiting on $50 million from Dubai. I shit you not. This was right after the Anna Delvey movie came out. And anyway, eventually they just said, sorry, we can't pay. I sued them. I won the lawsuit by default, but then they just avoided paying for another year. So I had my attorney bring the CEO owner in for a deposition. His books were a mess. It showed that he hadn't brought on board members until, recently or right before, after I'd won the suit. And in reviewing, she saw that, he had loaned personal funds into the business and then paid himself back before taking care of his debts in the business. And I didn't know, that was like a fiduciary, whatever you call a responsibility thing, that you're required to do that. So now that I've seen that and I wound up benefiting from his mistakes, I'd like to know, other than that specific thing, what else can you do to shield yourself if you are a sole proprietor LLC, or which is what I am, or smaller person or smaller corporate entity?
We talked before about properly maintaining the entity, properly set up the entity. There are certain things that really bug judges. That's one of them. The other thing that bugs judges is they call it commingling of funds, right? And so you want to have a separate business checking account, separate from your personal funds. Everything for the business, from revenue to expenses, runs through the business account. Personal runs through the separate account. Is that same hypothetical where the plaintiff comes in and says, this is a sham, judge. They're one and the same person. Why should they be providing any liability protection? They're doing all this stuff out of the personal account, the business account. Judges really don't like that. And so I think the non-commingling of funds and keeping that separate and distinct is really important.
Going back to the spouses. My spouse and I are not divorcing yet, and we own our business 50% ownership. My question is, in the likely event that we have conflicting views on where the business should move, what kind of business decision needs to be taken and how, have you seen some common practices how businesses avoid kind of stalling and being blocked and, waiting for decision to be made is a failure in every respect? And I'm going to make my question more complicated. Let's assume we will not have full-time employees, and let's assume we will not share our 50% ownership with anyone. We might have investors, but we will share revenue rather than equity. So I'm sorry for making my question more complicated.
No, I'm happy to answer that. So most default legal documents, when you have a 50-50 ownership split, it's decisions are made by majority ownership in the company. And so the default is no action, which some people like. Hey, unless we're both on board with opening up that third location, it shouldn't happen. But the problem with that is that can lead to resentment over time. It could lead to deadlock in the business. And so there's other things you can put into place to have tie-breaking mechanisms, right? And so, for example, instead of it being 50-50, perhaps it's 51-49, if someone's bringing more to the table, whether that's capital, experience, clients, to say, hey, if there's a split here, they should really have the default decision. They should be the decision maker. The second of three I'll discuss is having a third party. We both trust this third party. They both have known us for more than a decade. They know this line of business. We trust them that when there's that point in time, which will come, for them to be the deciding vote, so we won't have that deadlock. So that's the second of the three. And the last one I don't like as much, but I'll mention anyway, is to have categories. Okay, these categories I have more expertise in, so I'll be the deciding vote. These other categories you have more expertise in. You know more about marketing or employment or whatever it might be. The problem with that is that when that time comes, there's a fight over the fight. So there's a fight over what category it falls in. No, that's a marketing issue. No, I think it's an employment issue. I should make that, right? So we often recommend clients either not have the 50-50 split or have a third party be the decision maker. Day one, like the 50-50 split, is an easy conversation to have. Everything's warm and fuzzy and rainbows and unicorns, and we want everything to be equal. But when the time comes when that decision needs to be made, that 50-50 split really can create a lot of problems.
I will say, just from the numbers side, many times I see the outcome of that where, unfortunately, what we see is both sides are so much at loggerheads that they spend so much on legal fees, so much fighting and sabotaging the business that it's just a horrific forensic mess or just a tax mess. So hopefully, you can avoid those things. And one way is, if possible, sometimes is try not to even go in business with your spouse is one suggestion, because running a business is tough, and it's inherently got conflicts. And so marriage should be one thing, and it's easy to say. But I mean, my mom was my dad's law secretary. I don't know how the hell he put up with it, but you got to have a separation in life if you can. But I wish you the best in what's coming up.
I don't care who you use for bookkeeping. Just please have someone else do the books. If it's like a spouse team, you don't want the problem of blaming the other person for having missed something on the back office side.
Yes, my name is David. I'm first-time founder of tech company. We started last year. No revenue yet. We're still building the product. We're planning to launch our product early March this year. So the rest of the team, engineering team is outsourced. And before we launch our product, what should I consider to stay compliant? Like, what do you have any advice for me? And the question is, like, what should I consider before launch to stay compliant in practice or legal?
Well, I would say, having helped, a few zillion tech ventures over the years, both in the U.S. and lately I've had a lot of inbound foreign tech ventures too. welcome to San Francisco where everybody's losing money. But hopefully you have money to pay for expenses during this time period. Relative to outsourcing, I'm just going to focus on that little point. With the latest OBBBA tax act from our great president, Trump, they put in one thing to make America great again, which is for outsourcing. They are encouraging it to be done domestically, and you're disadvantaged technically if you are using offshore brains. Notably, if they're domestic, you can expense it. Like if you're developing a software, it can be straight off R&D. If it's not, then it has to be amortized and burnt over many years. So in terms of saving money, just be really careful and don't do like one of my Australian tech ventures. I mean, the first thing that he did when he came to the US was to rent like a 20,000 square foot office. It's like, what the hell? But yeah, just go careful, go easy, be cheap, be careful on your money, and get a good CPA, get a good lawyer, but be careful of the big monster law firms, because they will eat you alive, okay? And so quite often, they're going to burn your fees up beyond imagination. You'll be in a conference room with on a long table with you and maybe your partner and 5 smiling lawyers, all of whom are billing you. And that's why I like referring a lot of my clients over to Doug Ben's firm for those type of tech ventures, where maybe sometimes you're going to need a really fancy, involved, complex deal team for an international fundraising event. But for the normal corporate events, I like referring to a smaller boutique law firm such as Doug's, because he bills efficiently and he's not going to have 5 guys on a conference table all billing simultaneously. I myself have fallen victim to that, and man, that money went fast. Go cheap, be careful. I probably need to get more specifics. You could talk to me later. I will say, lastly, when you have foreign labor, try not to become a mini multinational if you can. Like we're a U.S. entity, normally our gold standard is you'll set up a Delaware C company and you'll maybe you'll be registered in California. Folks like Doug can help with registering and all that. But if you end up have your IP, or you have like a sub in another country, or your IP's in another country, that gets really expensive and very, on our end, on the legal end, and also on the compliance end for taxation, it's nuts. I have one guy he is a mini multinational, and he's been without revenues for a long time. Only now is it starting to kick in, and my God, it's been so difficult. But the compliance issues are insane with like entities in 6 countries, no revenues. It's been nuts. It's been really difficult. Yes. So we can talk later.
So SBDC actually has a branch, Tech Futures Group, just specialized on tech companies. So please contact Jessica, because your company can qualify probably to have access to all these resources for tech companies. Okay?
I appreciate the kind words. Thank you for that. I think it's all about fit, like many things in life. Whether it's your CPA, your business attorney, it's all about fit. And I was at Big Law before I started my own practice in 2010. And there's a time and a place for Big Law. If you're raising a Series A, B, C round, if you have a very nuanced area that's highly specialized, maybe it makes sense. Other times, it's like using a sledgehammer for early stage businesses or small business owners. For a business like yours, I think the 2 things to be mindful of with the offshore sourcing of code is that I understand it's cost. Hiring a Bay Area programmer versus hiring someone who's international is a totally different cost differential. I think you want to protect yourself in 2 ways. Way number 1 is that anyone doing work for your company, whether it's a summer intern or whether it's an offshore worker, having their contract include that any confidential information you share with them, they can't share with other people, and any IP they work on for your company belongs to your company. And that's always important, but it's particularly important if you do decide to raise capital and you go to the Series A round. Those investors are going to expect everyone to have signed those agreements. And if you don't have an agreement on file, they're going to expect you to try to track that person down. And that person will say, well, this is interesting. I haven't heard from you in 3 years. You're asking me to sign this intellectual property assignment agreement. What's in it for me? Something good must be happening, right? So having them sign that day 1 will make the fundraising round so much easier. Or if you're selling your company, same thing with the acquired. If it's very clear that the IP belongs to your company, you're going to have much better sales price than if it's unclear whether or not the IP belongs to you. So that's one of two things. The second thing is, if you're doing offshore stuff, the enforcing the IP rights can be very difficult if you're trying to enforce it in other countries. Are you going to hire local counsel in Thailand to try to enforce the IP? So if nothing else, understanding that is a drawback to hiring international workers is trying to enforce those kind of provisions. But having a venue provision in that contract saying, if we have a fight, it's going to be in San Francisco, where I don't have to fly on their side of the country.
We have one more question, and then we're going to have so much to talk about in the back in part 3 of this. So,
hi.
Yes.
Thank you. Sorry, it's kind of hard to ask a question from back here. I couldn't find the back. But I just wanted to say that this question isn't about like offshore business. I do most of my business here in California, and I'm really focused right now just on California, within California, actually really within San Francisco. Before really looking at expanding services, it's kind of a big deal as far as preparing a business for that. So just really focused right now on local services. But my work is actually in notary services, and but I'm also trying to provide services and consulting. And so the question I have is about doing business as DBA. And I realize that there can be beneficial, it can be beneficial to have your business listed as a DBA. It's different names. So, for example, I have my business as an LLC, but below that I have like my notary services that I do, and then I have consulting services, and they're kind of like have these sub names underneath the main business. So I just wanted to ask about if you guys have any thoughts on using DBA and if that can be helpful. Thanks.
Sure, you have what you're required to do, and you have what you probably may want to do. What are you required to do? So in California, if you're doing business as anything besides your full personal name or the full legal name of the LLC, you're required to file that DBA with the county clerk's office. We call it a fictitious business name statement. We can't call it DBA. We're California. We have to be different, right? Fictitious business name statement. And then you publish it in the newspaper. So if you're using a different name than the full legal names, you're required to do that. What you might want to consider doing is, if you really believe in the brand, is getting a trademark. You're not required to, but there's some benefits to getting a federal trademark on the brand name as well.
Critical part of what you ask is bookkeeping, because I have seen people having 3 different types of businesses and everything is in one bank account. So they don't separate the bookkeeping for each, and they don't know what is profitable and what is not. And then in the time to do taxes, then it's a problem. So yeah, the DBA is going to help you also to separate these bank accounts. So you will have one bank account for the notary services and another bank account for consulting services. Then you can separate your bookkeeping.
okay, we are at time. What a great set of questions. What did we learn? A bunch of things here. A lot of colorful stories. Please file your taxes on time or file an extension on time. Please do not commingle your business and personal expenses or commingle across your businesses. And, have a conversation with your spouse if you're doing business together to make sure that you're on the same page about things. Can I get a huge round of applause for Original?